Welcome to Overwhelmed to Overcomer podcast with coach, encourager, and strategist Anna McLaughlin. If you're a Christian woman who has big dreams rooted in an even bigger God, but most days those dreams feel completely out of reach, trust me, I get it. As a homeschooling mama of 4, entrepreneur, investor, and all around wearer of many hats, I am right there with you. And yet, the Lord invites us to live out our God given purpose now in the midst of the madness. So, let's explore together how we can know our calling and walk in it today with clarity, with courage, with each other. It's time for you to live the life you love and love the life you live. Let's do this thing.
Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Overwhelmed to Overcomer. I have a treat for you. I know I say that every time I bring someone new in, but just wait because she's delightful. And this is that moment where everything that I value, you'll get to hear so much of it echoed through this conversation because it's what she values as well. And she speaks so beautifully. I want to introduce you all to Kristen Chadwick. Welcome, Kristen.
Thank you, Anna. This is such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your kind words.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know a little bit about you, but would you tell my friends a little bit about you, who you are, what your background is?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think probably the most important thing is I want to be the hungriest person in the room for Jesus,
Yes.
number one. And I am a wife to my husband Joshua for 20 years. We have 4 teenagers, and that keeps our life wild and fun and entertaining and full of um, adventure. That's what we'll say there. I also run a business called Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs, and we help produce and publish podcasts for kingdom entrepreneurs. And it's one of the greatest gifts I get to do is partner with people like you, Anna, and with other entrepreneurs out there who know in their gut that they have a story to share. And what a cool job to be able to just partner with somebody and say, yes, absolutely, let's make it amazing.
I love that. And listen, friends, everything that you, to any degree that you're like, wow, this is like a real podcast, I credit Kristen.
Mm,
She ran a podcast boot camp that I got to be a part of almost a year and a half ago. I was going to say 6 months ago. So, nope.
mm-mm. Nope.
Almost a year and a half ago. And I told her at the end, I said, I had a vision and now I'm a podcaster. And
Mm,
that's what she does. She makes us podcasters. And we're going to talk at the end. We're going to talk at the end about what that journey has looked like for me a little bit and how she helps people do that. But first we need to start with really one of the foundational like rules of the road or visions that you have that I so resonate with. And it's why I wanted to have this conversation, which is your conviction that we all have a story to share. Can you talk about
mhm.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so one of the things that I have really had a lot of time talking to Jesus about this specific subject, which is we're all called to deliver a message. We're part of his story. We all have our own unique story and how God has redeemed our story, or we are walking through our story. And I mean, if you just look at Jesus's life, he was all about story and encountering people every day, seeing them, hearing them, knowing them. And so, as believers who follow him, we get to put that into words. We get to share that through podcasting or writing or sharing with a friend. And yeah, so that's a deep value that I have of just believing as as Jesus did, that everybody has a story and everybody needs to be heard. Um, and and we can encourage and bring light into this world where there needs to be a lot of hope. And whether that's a business podcast or a book about your own motherhood or parenthood or marriage, no matter which way we get to use our voices, whether it's for one or many.
Um, okay, so here's what I want to know though, because I think this is the story we tell ourselves is, well, mine's not so special, right?
Mm,
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't have anything dramatic happen. I don't have some great, burning bush story.
yeah.
So what do you say to the woman who's feeling like, well, it's not enough. My story's not
Mm.
enough.
Oh, man. Well, number one, I'm going to say you are enough exactly where you are because you're ahead of somebody that is right behind you. And I actually last week in my own personal walk, I was listening to that lie of you're not enough. I mean, this is like one of those things that you forever are working through and reminding yourself, okay, the truth is. And the Lord had me in Proverbs, and it was actually, let me find it in my journal real quick. Um Proverbs, let's see here. 13 verse 25, and it talks about the lovers of God will have more than enough. And I love that. And I actually wrote in my journal, okay, I have more than enough time, energy, creativity, resources, health, community, fresh ideas, compassion, emotions. And so I think that that can be for anybody who's struggling with that of I don't have enough story. You absolutely do. You are living and breathing and you are his plan A. And so there is no other option. We are the highest concentration of him right now on this earth. And so you do have enough.
Mm. Oh, you are his plan A.
Mm,
Someone needs that right now. You are his plan A.
yeah.
So, what have you noticed as you've both worked with other men and women owning their own voices and you've walked this out yourself? What happens when we shift from, I'm not enough, my story doesn't matter, and we start to own our voice? How have you seen the kingdom advance as you've done
Mm,
that work?
yeah. Well, I've seen it. I mean, first and foremost in my own life, I went from somebody who is very shy. I was not used to using my verbal voice. I was good at writing to myself and to Jesus. But there definitely came a time where I was challenged to be courageous and to put myself out there. And I've seen it time and time again with podcasters who are on that, like, I know I should start a podcast. I feel it. I feel like the Lord gave me a title, or I feel that, inner whispering in me, or I know I need to write a book. And to watch that process of like, okay, I'm going to say yes out of courage and obedience, but purely out of like this adventure of like, all right, I trust you that you have something more than what I can see currently. And so for me, this was back in 2020 when I first started my first podcast. And I had my husband cheering me on, thankfully, and a dear best friend of mine that was like, Kristen, people need to hear your voice. And so that process was a little wobbly, but and that's real. That's like you're learning how to get your feet underneath you and getting those reps in. But the impact, because I have shared my voice, and this is just my story, and like I said, there's many other stories, but because I recorded that podcast, I know of at least 2, if not maybe hundreds of women who have come to Jesus because of that podcast or come back to Jesus. And that to me is wild. I mean, wild. I had one lady, this is like one of my most treasured gifts from the Lord was to know this. But I had one lady who listened to one of my first podcasts, which was a recording of basically using our imagination, which I call our secret place with Jesus. Uh, and it was just a comforting thought of, okay, picture Jesus and him with you and him loving on you in whatever way that was. I don't know. I don't remember the specific episode it was, but anyway, this lady emails me and she was like, I cannot tell you how profoundly this impacted my friend who was given this episode. She was going to commit suicide, listened to the podcast episode, and decided not to because she felt the love of Jesus. Like,
Oh,
that to me is like, oh my word, Lord, like, I am so thankful that you gave me the courage to say yes and just record the thing.
yes.
Because, if not, like, oh, man, I know Jesus could have worked so many different other ways, but just to be a part of that in such a huge way is, absolutely, humbling for sure.
Oh, it's unbelievable, and just I mean, what a sweet grace from God that you got
Mm.
to know that.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
truth of the matter is just like you said, maybe 2, maybe hundreds of people coming
Mhm.
back to the Lord. We can't know, right? It's like
Mhm.
I think about the lepers where he heals 10 and the 9 go away, never come back, and 1 circles back around, and
Yeah.
he knows every story, but how many stories are happening because of what he's given us to say that we'll never hear about.
Yeah.
We get this tiny little piece that becomes like that deposit of saying, "Keep going, keep
Mhm.
going." Oh,
Yes. Yeah.
oh, that's so beautiful. And I love how you talked about, I forget the word you used, but that kind of halting beginning,
Mm.
right? And I've heard so often, I'd love to hear if you have anything to speak into this. I've heard women say, because I've watched a lot of women start journeys, mostly in business, but in various things. As a coach, I get to see some of that too. And there's this kind of moment of, well, maybe I misheard the Lord because it's not going very well. So
Uh-huh.
speak to that kind of like, he told me something, and then it's like there's no downloads, or it's no one's responding. I sent out the
Yeah.
email and nobody wrote back. I mean, I remember when I first launched my business, refreshing my email screen thinking that someone would respond right away, and then wondering why not, right? So speak to that moment where it's like, I've stepped out, I've done the thing I feel like he called me to do, and then silence. What do we do
Mm.
there?
Yeah. I mean, it always keeps us humble, right? Like, okay,
Yes,
I've got this, like, courage and then, ooh, this is I called it hobbling along.
that's it,
But
that's
it
so good.
makes me think of, like, I was just telling my kiddo yesterday who is practicing hearing from the Lord, and I use this example, and I think it applies here, is, the way that I was taught was when a toddler is starting to walk and there's, like, the father's across the room and he sees his kid, like, brace himself and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it." And he takes, like, one step and he's like, "Ah, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm walking." And then he takes a second one and then he falls down on his little diapered bum, you know? Um, you would not expect the dad in the room to be like, "Ugh, I can't believe you fell." Like, what a disappointment. I guess you'll just never walk.
Yeah, you
Uh,
must not be meant
you
to
must
walk.
not meant to be walking. And so I think that is the same with when he does let us, partner with him in something that is like starting a business or starting a podcast or writing a book, and we get out of the gate or we start those 1 to 2 little steps of like, "Okay, this is a little wobbly, but I'm kind of excited about this because this is amazing." And then we fall a little bit. But he's there to, like, come over just like a dad and pick us up under the, armpits and, like, pick us back up and be like, "All right, buddy, you could do this again. Let's keep going. Like, maybe it's 3 steps this time." So I think there's so much grace and so much, I don't know, like, he's just not that worried about it, and he loves to have fun with you and to see you walking in your purpose, in your mission, and whatever that looks like, whether you pivot from what you think you're about to start or you are starting and you pivot to something else. I think that we are all, if we're uh, lockstep with him, then we have that opportunity to always learn something and to continue on and try again and try again.
Yes. Well, and one of the things I've noticed myself and I'd love to hear if you have anything to add to this, is this place of like, I call it when the teacher becomes the student, where it's like we have to kind of, we have to go through the school of hard knocks when we're called to lead in a space,
Mhm.
particularly. And, so I think about the smooth path that you provided for all of us in your podcast launch package, where it
Mm.
was like, okay, I can go from idea, or even like, I don't even have an idea, but I know I'm supposed to do a podcast, right? We can
Uh-huh.
go from that to a set podcast with the art tile and the show description and the launch schedule and the back office. You made that seamless for us.
Mm.
And I just think about what the process must have looked like for you in order for you to be ready to then put this nice little bow on, here's how you launch a podcast. And so I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of, to some degree, knowing from the get go, if I'm called to lead in a space, I'm going to have to kind of be the guinea pig.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean I'm wrong. It actually can be that finger, like, on the point of it going, "Yeah, you're exactly where you need to be because you need to go
Totally.
through all of this." Have you found that
Mhm.
too?
Oh, for sure. Oh, yes. Mhm. Well, it's hard to lead if you haven't walked that road. I
Yes.
mean, yeah, that would be very tough for sure.
Yeah. Something that I think we're circling back a little bit, but one of the things that you were talking about is like, that place of owning your voice. And I think that one of the enemy's lies that we tend to kind of lean into as believers, because we're called to be humble, is this place of who do you think you are? So,
Oh,
what
yes.
do we do with who do you think you are?
Oh, this is, like, one of my favorites.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, so, actually, it came out of your boot camp that we did, um, because that question kept coming up, and again, not only in my own life, but I would see it in podcasters who would make this brave step, and then they would get hit with this onslaught of accusation of, "Who do you think you are?" Um, and, I mean, you could feel that as a mom. Who do you think you are being a mom to, homeschoolers or to so many kids or to one kid or whatever. And my own journey through that, I had a podcaster in that podcast group ask that question in our group time. She was like, "I just keep hearing who do you think you are?" Well, at the same time, the Lord was teaching me my own journey through that story, and I'll come back and I'll answer that question of how you can. But I want to share this part of the story. Was I was uh, in a season of feeling really like I didn't belong in this in-person networking group, and it was a bunch of women. They were all so kind, but I had my own internal stuff going on, and every time I would walk into that room once a month, it was like instant anxiety. I wanted to leave, so I would, like, make bargains with myself of, like, "Okay, if I could just make it through the first hour, I'm gonna leave after that." And so I kept bringing it before the Lord of like, what is this about? I don't understand why I get so anxious in front of people. And he very sweetly gave me this picture as I was praying about it of being in the throne room. And it was like the Father sitting in one chair, Jesus next to him. And the Father just like leans down to me and he was like, Kristen, if you belong in the throne room, you belong in any room. And it
Oh,
yeah, it hit deep, and it still hits deep to this day thinking about that, because I get to say my Father, he let me into this throne room because of Jesus. So that means any place here on earth, I am welcome because he's already welcomed me here. Um, so coming back to that moment in the podcast boot camp, during this group coaching call, and one gal speaks up and says, "I just keep hearing who do I think I am, or who do you think you are starting this podcast?" And it just was so clear, to flip it right back to her and be like, "Yes, who are you? Who are you? I want to know who are you to start a podcast." And it really was coming out of this place of, I know that we all have a kingdom identity. We are all we are all in the throne room. We all belong in the room. We all belong here. And so to be able to stand in that anchoring truth for myself and then hold space for her and for any other podcaster who is asking that question, or writer or business owner or mom, who am I, is really coming back to this anchoring place of, yeah, who does he say you are?
Mm.
And any other thing has to fall down that is not answering the way that the Father would answer.
Hey, Mama, let me ask you a question. When's the last time you gave yourself some white space? I am not talking about a trip to the bathroom alone or even the grocery store. When's the last time you had what I like to call some no one needs me time? For homeschooling entrepreneurs, time like this isn't a luxury. It's actually a key component to a healthy business, homeschool, and family life. So, if you're ready for your next respite, whether it's you by yourself, you and your spouse, or a family trip, join us at our peaceful haven, Just Like Paradise, located on gorgeous Oak Island, North Carolina. This 3-bedroom house is just a short walk to the ocean and nearby restaurants. It has a screened-in back porch with fireplace that is to die for, hot tub, and even a fire pit if you're feeling ambitious. Book through the link in the show notes, and then you have a unique discount code, podcast100, to get a $100 discount on your stay as a thank you for being one of my listeners. Get your next getaway on the calendar today.
Oh, it's so good. One of the conversations that we come back to again and again in this podcast in particular is Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son, where the elder brother is like, you never even gave me a goat. But if we know the full story and we look at the beginning, the father divided his inheritance between them. And so when the father says, you have always been with me and all that I have is yours, it was literally, it's like, we've literally the keys to the kingdom, the whole property,
Yeah.
everything that he stood on was his already, but he
Mhm.
lived outside in the shadows. And
Yeah.
so when we entertain, who do you think you are? We deny our daughtership and say, oh, I just belong out here in the shadows. And we think it's humility, but it's really like devaluing what the Father has done in and through us. And it's actually by stepping forward that we magnify him,
Mhm.
not by shrinking back. So we've talked about why it matters. What do we do with this stirring inside of us when we start to feel like I have something to say, or that, I mean, for me it always felt like a burning in my heart where I was watching a conversation go with a group of friends
Mm.
was, and I started seeing themselves take themselves down, or I started to see them like shrink back and be disregarding their value, or living lives that were just kind of like um half measures, right? Oh, I can't step
Mhm.
out. I have to, I have to be there for the kids. So I can't really love my life,
Yeah.
that'll wait until they move out, whatever it is. And I would get this burning. I'd be like, what? Like,
Love
so,
it.
so how do we know what our voice is? And then
Mhm.
what do we do about it?
Oh, man, how do we know our voice? Well, we have to learn to listen and listen to our voice. I think one of my favorite words is connection, connection with myself and connection with God and connection with others. And I think we really have to know who we are, number one, like what we talked about. And from there, asking Jesus, Holy Spirit, God, what what is the message? And where, like, open my eyes to see where is that like rising up in me that I want to say something, but I'm not quite comfortable sharing yet, or like what you experience, Anna, like with a group of friends and they say something and you're like, oh, like you feel that like inner burning of like, oh, that's so not the truth, or you get vibrant with your I don't know, your opinion, or your opinion is probably not the right word because that could be swayed, but
Like a
I
conviction.
it's a conviction,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it could be that you're 100% stay-at-home mom and you are convicted to be a stay-at-home mom, or it could be, um, like you and your husband have this very sweet marriage that maybe multiple people have commented on of like, how do you do that? How, like, that seems like you guys have that figured out. So noticing like what people say, that was one thing for me in particular was our friends kept saying, we want to hear what you have to say. And so just that confirmation of other people, what do they keep asking you? Are they asking you about like what's the new, I don't know, what's the best food to feed my kid? Or what's the I don't know, how do you read your Bible? What's the best way that you read your Bible? How do you connect with God? Like what are those common questions that people tend to go to you for? And that will kind of give you a clear idea of maybe there's something there that you have this gift and a key for other people to unlock for other people.
I love that. And I really, one of the things, and I think this is why that "Who do you think you are" can gets a foothold, is it's often so easy and natural for us that we don't even realize the gift that it is. Like, I listen to
Yes.
my friends that are great at cooking. I mean, literally, I've gone to friends' houses on multiple occasions to have them teach me how to make dinner because 'cause I'm like, "But you have to do it every day. I don't understand." You know? Which for, probably a much larger majority of women than not, that's not even necessarily a thought that,
Yeah.
paralyzes them, but people like me need to know the secret. How do you feed your family every day, 3 times a day?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's going to feel like, well, I could talk about that all day. That's so
Mhm,
easy. And
mhm.
that's how we know, not that it's not valuable, but that it is who we are uniquely in Christ.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think, like, one tangible thing too, other I think that's a great way. I think another really beautiful way is if you're a journaler or even, like, if you have, like, a voice memo, write or say your thoughts down. Like,
Ooh.
start getting the words out. So, for me, really finding my voice started with writing, and so the practice of continuing to hear my own heart and to hear, God speaking through my heart on my own journal pages was definitely the very first step of, "Oh, that's me. That's my voice right there." It's not a devotional that I read. It's not a somebody else's words that I put on paper. And I think that especially with this is another little tangent, but with another like or with all the information and podcasts and just so much content that is out there that who do you think you are? Or I'm going to talk about the same thing that so and so talks about. So how am I different than her? This is where your thought leadership comes from is your time with you and your thoughts and God's thoughts and really grounding yourself in that first and foremost before going to somebody else's podcast or YouTube or whatever and listening to their thoughts and then regurgitating. I think we've lost the art or there's a lot of people that have lost that art of having their own thought leadership, and I really do think it starts with really being self-aware and connected to Jesus.
Mm. Oh, that's so good. And Kristen, what it reminds me too is it's like when we entertain that "Who do we think we are?" It just all it means is that we've shrunk our platform.
Yeah.
We've moved the microphone in the other room.
Mhm.
We still are who we are. The question is now, are we going to do it in our little secret place in our closet? Or
Mhm.
are we actually going to let other people be ministered to by the words that we're saying?
Yeah.
And something really there was a fascinating reel that I saw recently, and I at the moment I was like, like this is no. So what's his name? Russell Brand has become a Christian
Oh, yeah.
recently,
Uh-huh.
right? And there was an influencer who had a recording of him and he basically said his caption at the bottom was, he needs to stop teaching. He needs to sit down and be quiet and receive instruction, biblical instruction, rather than kind of being out there with the microphone. And
Mm.
I was like, what is he talking about? Like, here is a man who actually came to faith in front of the camera. Like,
Yeah.
we got to watch him work out his salvation with fear and
Mhm.
trembling in front of the nation.
Yeah.
And are we actually going to suggest that he like go into the shadows and take away his platform
Mhm.
now that he's a baby Christian instead of an almost Christian? Like, oh no, no, now you can't talk anymore. And I
Yeah.
got like mad,
Yeah.
because the truth of the matter is that there are plenty of non-believers out there who have huge audiences who are saying all kinds of things.
Mhm.
We if each of us as believers owned our little stage that the Lord has
Yeah.
put us on, like,
Yeah.
think of the revolution that could
Yes.
take place if we all just stepped up and said, no, I don't need to wait till a Bible teacher has like cured through my theology and culled through my
Yes.
theology and set me straight. I don't need to wait until I know it all. I don't need to wait until I've confirmed every little piece of doctrine. I'm going to share what the Lord has given me today. I'm going to
Mhm.
stand on it as his word in my life. And the beauty is when we're faithful in that little, he gives us more.
Mhm.
Maybe a bigger stage, but certainly more wisdom, more discernment, more clarity, more of his heart, more of his fruits of the spirit working through us. So if we're just kind of hiding all the things under a little basket because we think we're not qualified,
Mhm.
sit down and shut up, Russell, because you haven't gone to seminary, dude. I mean,
Yeah.
it
Ugh.
what a waste.
Yes.
Mm,
Yes. I love all of what you just said, and I think it really comes down to discernment of, is this a season like for Russell, it is his season to share his journey, and how many people that's impacting, we will never know. Um, and I will say to the flip side, there are seasons, like I just had a season last year where, the Lord prompted me to just be quiet, and there were some
yes,
hidden things that I needed to just, hidden things meaning like I needed to just be, um, receiving instead of receiving, pouring out, receiving, pouring out, receiving,
yes,
pouring out, just in that season.
yes,
Now, I think what you're alluding to is, we as believers, we are called to be light. And like Jesus says, we are called to, put our lamp up on the stand. And um, Jesus was all about visibility. And like you can see that in how he built the church. Like Acts 2, it literally was like plop, boom, here's Holy Spirit. Now go out and share. He didn't say, now stay in the upper room and don't tell anybody about it, but it'll just work itself out.
yes,
No, like he sent out all sorts of people with all sorts of stories and encounter with who Jesus was and the Holy Spirit, and that's how they spread the good news, was they talked about it. They did signs and wonders. They went and delivered, like there's this one lady in the New Testament. I love her. Her name is Phoebe, and I cannot wait to meet her in heaven. Um, but she was Paul's messenger, and she was called to deliver the Romans, the letter, the Roman letter, like the book of Romans. And anyway, she risked her life to carry these scrolls into Rome and deliver this letter. Like, that was her job, and I really think that that's how we continue to bring light, to, um, spread the gospel, to be visible, is to be open to going through, whether you have, like, messy parts where you're like, "I'm still working this out," like Russell, like,
yeah,
"I think this is how it goes," and we're all human anyway. Nobody is perfect. Nobody's got it figured out, and so you're gonna be waiting a long time if you are waiting to know it all, or to, have all of the degrees to prove that you're worthy of using your voice. Like, you're already worthy. You already belong in the throne room.
yes. Oh, it's so good. Well, and what I've heard you say a couple of times, Kristen, that I just want to like underline and highlight and circle and all of it is you've talked about it starts at the feet of the Father.
Mhm,
Like that we kind of start to recognize our voice through prayer, through our
mhm,
time with him. And then we discern, when do we speak and when do we pull back and kind of have a time of hibernation before the Father through his prompting, and
mhm,
that ultimately, and that's one of the tenets of this podcast, this conversation is it all comes back to We start at his feet, we end at his feet, we come back to his feet, we live at his feet. It's all
Mhm.
about that intimacy with him. This is how we know. We
Mhm.
don't like check boxes or sign up for a seminar or have someone else tell us. Like, we come before him and we say, my life is yours. Like,
Mhm.
do with it what you will. And I think too, if we're not a little bit nervous every now and again in our life, that maybe it's time to like turn the heat up a little bit. I think
Mm.
sometimes.
So good. So good. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, you think about, like, even just biblically, all the people that God picked out, they were all scared.
All of
So,
them.
Moses, Joshua, I
Joshua,
mean,
I know.
gosh. Yeah.
I know, like
Uh,
that moment where I had a Bible study teacher one time say, "Look how many times like that in the book of Joshua at the beginning he says like, do not be
be
afraid, for
strong
I'm with you.
and
Be
courageous.
strong and courageous." That's what it is. And you know what I realized at one point, I forget if somebody pointed this out or if I just noticed it. That was a word he gave to Moses first. And
Yes.
so I just think about how precious that it's like not only is he saying be strong and courageous, don't be afraid, for I'm with you, but he's bringing back the same benediction that he gave to Moses and saying like the
Mm,
mantle is on you now. That's neither here nor
yeah,
there, but I was like, "Oh, that was good too."
that is good. Legacy, love
That's
it.
right. That's right. Okay,
Uh,
so I want to go one more place, which is we know we know we have this microphone that we can step up to, literal, figurative, spiritual, whatever it is. And I want to hear like how do we begin? Whether we like I know we start with the Lord, but then we start to step out. And I want you to actually I want to go to a specific place on this because I know there's a lot of places that we could go to speak. But
yeah.
your gifting is podcasting. My love, of course, is podcasting. Can you talk about kind of the first step that we can do with podcasting? This opportunity to guest, I think it's the gateway. Do you
Yeah.
agree? And what do you think about that?
I agree that it is the gateway. I think even before you start to guest is really getting clear on who God has called you to serve.
Yeah.
Um, because once you know your who, and it really can be, I mean, it doesn't have to be super specific. It could be, it could be somebody who's hungry to grow in their faith. It could be, um, I want to speak to moms. I want to speak to small business owners. But you And the reason why is because Jesus always started with who. It was always a person. And when you have a person, you have a heart. And then in that way, you can encourage other people. So I would even start before you even go on to guesting as a podcast guest, is to really get clear on who do you want to love on? Who are those people that you're like, man, if I had a room full of these people, I could I could love well here. And, it could be kids, it could be I don't know. Like, for me, like, the first place that I would think of is, like, I would love to talk to young moms. So,
Mhm.
like, think of your first person that you think of, and then you think about, "Okay, who has a podcast, or where can I find a podcast that fits that mold?" Like, they speak to this type of person. Um and then kinda go from there. But as far as, like, the podcast guesting world, um, it's a fun place to be. I just saw a wild statistic. It was something like the stats of the amount of podcast guests per podcast host is, like, 48 to 1. So there's, like, that many people per one podcast that are wanting to be on their show. So um you have quite the opportunity as a podcast host to have many, many different guests. So that means you if you're wanting to step into podcast guesting for the first time, I would suggest either if you number 1, if you know anybody in your community that fits your mold of who you serve, ask them. If you don't have anybody that's right in your circle, then asking people in your circle, do you know of any podcasters that serve blank? Um, Outside of that, there's awesome programs like Podmatch is my favorite, where it's like a dating app, but not really dating app, but it matches podcasters with other podcaster. guest or host, depending on what you want to focus on. Um, and it will match you with the people that you feel called to serve in a way that is a good fit instead of because you don't want to waste anybody's time. Like if you know, you're speaking to, executive corporate people like to go onto somebody who just talks to small business owners on organic farming. Like it's just like you want to make sure that you align well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I will say, and I don't know if you think this is common or not, but one of the things that I found when I started guesting was I actually got to hone and refine my voice where it was like,
Mhm.
oh, that's because you get asked all these questions and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you do, right? It's like, I
Yes.
do know what I think about that. I actually do know. No one's ever asked me that before, but now, yes, I do. And
Yes.
so we get to kind of step forward and it provides that confirmation of like, oh, I really do have something to share here. And in
Mhm.
addition, now I know even more like what I really think, what I really value. And
Yeah.
so it's that parable of the talents, like faithful in little set over more,
Yes.
faithful in little and set over more, over and over again. So
Mhm.
I mean, is that what you've noticed your other people have as well? Where it's like, oh yeah, I use the muscle and then it gets stronger.
For sure. Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of people that are like me, who might be more of like internal processors. And so somebody to ask them those questions it's really going to help you refine really your voice in that regard of like, oh, I actually do know. And I am under a timeline of like, I have to answer right now. I can't
That's
sit on this for 15 minutes and then be like, okay, well, so here's what I was thinking. It does help you use that muscle of trusting yourself that you do know uh, how to answer a good question. And I would say most podcast hosts are phenomenal, like Anna, at asking questions that are not yes or no questions, but more of a conversational question that can really start to unpack and uncover really what you are wanting to say. And so then every podcast episode that you end up recording as a guest, you get clearer and clearer and clearer of what you're bringing to the table.
Okay, so tell me this. There might be someone listening to this who's like, okay, it's I don't just have a message I want to share like here and there on a guesting spot. Like
Yeah.
I actually want to do this thing. There's no one I feel like there's no one better than you to shepherd
Oh.
people through that process. So
Mm.
I want to make sure that my people hear what what would it look like if they were like, I want to do this thing. How can I do it well? And they want to connect with you. What does working
Yeah.
with you look like?
Well, I would say, if you wanted to dig a little bit deeper of how I take people through this process of launching, I have a great series from last summer in 2024. There's a 10-step series that I put on my podcast, Podcast Coaching for Kingdom Entrepreneurs. And it is literally 10 steps on how to start a podcast. And it basically walks you through everything that Anna walked through in the boot camp for free and under like 10 minutes per episode. So you get a good overview of what I think it takes to launch a successful podcast. Then I would say if you're like, "Kristen, I'm all in. I just wanna go. I feel the green light. I have the funds to really have somebody help me do this," then I would say let's meet one-on-one for a call to see if we're a good fit, and I do help people launch their podcast, so everything that you talked about, the podcast art tile, getting clear on your podcast pillars or your blueprint, getting clear on your why, your who, your content plan, how to launch well. So we do one on one with that. And then we also offer after episode one to come into our podcast management services. So those are both ways to connect with me.
I love that. Oh, and you won't go wrong. Obviously,
Mm,
everybody that's listening knows that you're an absolute gem.
mm,
So
thank
thank
you.
you. Okay, so Kristen, any this all I feel like we could go so many more
I
places, but
know.
I'm gonna tie a little bow. Any final word of encouragement for anybody who's listening right now?
Yeah. I think what I would say is you deserve to be seen, heard, and known. And the person that you're called to serve and to love well needs to be seen, heard, and known. And they're like you could be that person that unlocks something in them to set them free from something. And so think about that as you're like processing, well, do I write the book? Do I not write the book? Do I is this the season? If it's not the season, like really come back to that question with Jesus of, is this the season that I say yes? And partner with courage, like your podcast is all about, is really stepping into that courage and being brave. Um, and see where it goes. It's just fun. So it's hard work, but it is fun. And what an adventure we get to walk with Jesus in this life.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I love that. So I'll often think, someone's waiting for me. Like
Mhm.
someone's waiting for me. Someone's waiting for this next podcast episode. And even just these little moments of encouragement. I had someone circle back to me and say, "Oh my gosh, that episode you did on blah 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 like a couple of months ago was such a gift." And I was like,
Mm.
I remember that episode. I did not think too much of that one.
It's always that way too.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that was like hold your nose and just hit record. Like we got nothing to offer today. That's okay. We're gonna just do the footwork.
It's
And
real.
it's the B minus work. Sometimes those are the things because then it was just Jesus, right? Whatever came out of
Yes,
this was just him.
exactly. So true. So true.
Oh, I
Uh,
love it. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for being here.
oh, thank you so much for having me. Seriously, it is such an honor to be on your podcast and to see you grow and bless people in the way that you do. And I just have always admired how you have a way with words and how you process. I love it and it's so beautiful and it's encouraging to me. So thank you for doing this podcast and for having me on here.
Oh my gosh, it's just such a pleasure. And yeah, just I told her at the beginning, friends, I was like, I'm a little nervous. Like my coach is in the room.
Yeah.
But it's so sweet. When we first connected, I was like, one day I'm gonna have her on as a guest. Like this will
Aw.
be so it's just been my privilege and such a
Oh,
gift. And yeah, I just thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. And to my friends that are listening, just know this encouragement is for you.
Mhm,
Walk in your voice, own it. The
mhm.
Father has beautiful work to do in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And until next time, you know what I'm gonna say? You've got this because he's got you.
Friend, thank you so much for listening to this most recent episode of Overwhelmed to Overcomer. So, listen, the whole idea behind this mission is that when we endeavor to be brave with our lives, we need to do it together. Belonging is key. So, if you resonated with the message from this episode, share it with a friend. Do it together. Thank you again. And never forget, you've got this because he's got you.